Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us, and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. Welcome back to the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. So this is a bonus solo episode, prompted by some shares that came through in a community survey that I ran, and then also some reflections I've been having after episode 2 that I did, the one on creative expression with Ellis Elliott. And then also some things from my own life. So before diving in, let's go ahead and begin with our ritual of lighting a candle. So rituals are really powerful because they signal that we're settling into maybe a more connected, more receptive state. They signal that we're coming together to be changed by an experience, right? So as I light our candle, take a few deep breaths. And then let's take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're each on. The rocks, the roots, the soil, all the fungi and the microbiome in the soil, minerals, any animals or insects that burrow, geographical formations, water, plants, trees, flowers, animals that crawl, that hop, that run, that fly, animals we like and maybe animals we don't like so much, insects that we like, insects that might scare us. The sky, the clouds, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets. And so as we take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on, the land that's around us in this moment, the people that stewarded the land before our ancestors arrived, the people that steward the land now, the land maybe where our ancestors came from, the stones that our bones would recognize. As we take a moment to acknowledge all of that, we're weaving a web, right? Well, the web's already there, but we're reconnecting, we're intentionally connecting with the woven web of life. So as we acknowledge the land, we're also going to acknowledge the space that you're in, whether you're listening in your house, in your car, in your office, on a walk, right? Wherever you listen or watch this podcast, acknowledge the space that's around you, the objects that are in that space. The ecosystem that is that space, right? Nature is not separate from the buildings that we live in, from the cars that we drive. They seem separate, but they're not. There's still microbiome, there's still air. We can still connect with the elements, with celestial bodies, right? There's light that might come in. There's also people, right? So whether there are people around you right now or not, there are people that are in your web. And so it's important to acknowledge these webs of community, these webs of care, these webs of kinship. Because we're wired to feel kinship. And it's also particularly important. I'm starting with a little bit more intentionality here in this episode, because this episode is about dissatisfaction. And so you can feel how just even saying the word, like I start to bring up it, like energetically sort of activates a little bit of that feeling tone of dissatisfaction. And because I'm in the space where I've intentionally connected with this web of aliveness, I'm now aware that this dissatisfaction is like friction on the web, right? And if I don't tend to it, if I don't tend to the dissatisfaction, if I don't surround it with a lot of care, if I don't listen and receive its message, if I resist it or repress it, or act it out in ways that then are maybe bigger or less intentional, that dissatisfaction can also create ruptures in the web, right? And that's not inherently bad. Spiders reweave webs when ruptures are created, right? Sometimes you catch a bug, they catch a bug, and the bug's too big for that web, and it shakes the web, and it might tear the web and be able to get away. And then the spider reweaves the web, right? So rupture and repair are always happening. So it's not inherently a bad thing. But because we're used to orienting, we're wired to orient ourselves in this life through the web, right? We know, we take in information, we take in knowing, we connect with the world and relate to the world through this web, right? Through energy. And so because we're wired for that, anytime we feel dissatisfaction, anytime we feel that friction, anytime the web starts getting shaky, that's going to feel uncomfortable for us. And we might resist it. And a lot of spiritual practices, that's part of why a lot of spiritual practices tell us that the way to peace is through not feeling dissatisfaction, right? But again, we're also programmed to be able to have rupture and have repair. And so friction can also start a spark, right? Can start a flame. And sometimes rupture needs to happen. Rupture is not inherently bad. Rupture is only a problem when there aren't the tools, when there isn't the compassionate witnessing for repair to then happen. So there is a gift in dissatisfaction. It's totally human to feel that. And if we didn't feel dissatisfaction, where would the friction in our life that creates a spark that can then start a fire, that can then show us where we're out of alignment, that can then shift us back into something that's more aligned or move us into growth, right? Transformation. If we didn't let dissatisfaction happen, we would miss out on those other things, right? So this episode, we're going to explore dissatisfaction, and we're going to explore how we can start to be with dissatisfaction in a different way, to then reclaim dissatisfaction in ways that are hopefully that feel more effective. So first, let's look at why we usually feel dissatisfaction, why we usually feel dissatisfied. So sometimes it might be because we have to give something up before we feel ready to. Sometimes it might be because we're beating ourselves up for being who and how we are, or wishing we could be different, right? Sometimes we're disappointed in what life's giving us, or we're disenchanted with how the future looks, with what possibilities we see in front of us. Or sometimes it might be because we expected something that we aren't getting, right? We expected life to look differently. We expected our relationships to look differently. We expected to receive something that we're not getting. We expected to be acknowledged at work or to be acknowledged by a partner, right? Or it might also be, we might feel dissatisfied because we inherited genes or inherited patterns from our ancestors that we don't like, right? So dissatisfaction can also be like from our own roots, from the soil that we grew in. So those are all stories and circumstances around the feeling of dissatisfaction, right? But you'll notice too that the theme in all of those is either that something's out of alignment or that there's something in us that's ready to grow. And then there's also something in us that might be resisting that or might be afraid, right? So, but if we stay focused only on the circumstances and stories around the actual feeling of dissatisfaction, that's going to keep us stuck in sort of feedback loops, right? When we start to place blame, or we start to feel overly agitated and then overly hopeless, right? Or we start to judge ourselves or others. So I'm going to walk us through feeling the body sensations of dissatisfaction. And I'll use myself as an example. Body sensations, somatics, while sometimes uncomfortable to feel, usually bring us closer to the legitimate seed at the heart of what it is that we're feeling, which helps us get clearer and closer to action, right? So we're getting out of the mental story loops and we're moving into something that's, yeah, a little bit closer to the truth of what we're experiencing in the present moment. So if you're in an okay place and already have some somatic awareness practice, then you're welcome to tune into your own body. If you don't have experience with that yet, move slowly, because sometimes we tap into, if we haven't been tapped into sensations in a while and we start to try to, that might open up more than we feel prepared to handle in that moment. So don't overwhelm yourself and seek out professional help or support if you need to. So I'm going to start with just sort of bringing to mind something I'm feeling unhappy with or wishing were different. And so right away, I noticed my body responding. So at first it kind of feels like a grating, kind of nails, like a little bit of a clawing kind of around my solar plexus. And then almost right away, I also feel a little bit of like backing away or trying to push something away. And then I also feel then like a sense of hopelessness, like giving up, sadness, collapse. And so if you're tuning into your own body, what are you noticing? So not the stories in your mind. Notice I was staying with actions and sensations. So clawing, it might feel heavy, it might feel light, it might feel tight, it might feel itchy, right? So staying with those types of descriptive words. Sometimes it feels like a grinding in my jaw, my eyes get tight, or my gaze focuses in. Sometimes my hands and legs want to move. Sometimes I get more confused or fluttery. Frustration and tears. So that's okay. What's happening is all nervous system response, right? So dissatisfaction, that spark, is a charge of energy entering our system, right? Friction is a building up of energy. So when we have a charge of energy, in a healthy state, our system will then pause for a moment and determine, are we fighting? Are we running? Right? But we have to do something with that energy. Now, if we can't do anything with that energy, what ends up happening is our system then dampens that energy off, right? So that we don't get overwhelmed by it. And so that's where we start to find the hopelessness, the collapse, the tears, right? Those are all ways that we try to shift out of that charged state and into a calmer state, although it's not truly rest and digest, right? It's actually more of a collapse state. So it's just showing us how our nervous system, those feelings are just showing us how our nervous system is moving, is handling the energy that's coming in, because we're feeling this spark of something that wants to instigate movement, that wants to instigate growth, that wants to instigate change. Okay. So let's kind of take a moment, tie this into creativity. So if creativity is life force energy, and this spark of dissatisfaction, if dissatisfaction is a spark or is friction that's generating some kind of impulse to move, some kind of impulse to be in action, then that's very connected with life force energy. That's very connected actually with creative energy, because that spark is trying to move us into growth and into transformation. And that is inherently connected with life force energy, is inherently connected with creativity and creative impulse. So there's the myth, one of the myths around creativity is that we only access it when we're out of survival mode, right? When we're feeling good, when we have time and extra energy, extra time, extra energy to create something new. But that's because we're assuming that creativity is related to producing something. So a few days ago, I was like deep in my feels about some big life decisions. And someone who knows me and knows I've been exploring creativity made a joke about like kind of threw my own words back at me a little bit, like, oh, access your creativity, get you out of this like funk. And I, of course, like that did not land well. But then I sat with it once I was kind of a little bit more out of the feels. I was able to sit with it here and sort of ask, okay, so I know it's true that creativity is accessible to us in these moments of challenge. And so why did it feel so far away from me in that place? And then I realized I was making a mistake about what creativity was, right? I was assuming that my big feels were not creative. But what if the feels that I was in were creative? Right? What if the act of honestly feeling my feelings, honestly being willing to express them, even if only to myself, right? And in whatever way. So maybe it was movement. In that moment, it was just tears, or yeah, just presence, actually, right? And so what if presence with our own lived, felt, embodied experience is creative, right? Because it's accessing, it's allowing life force energy to flow through us, to move through us, to change us, to grow us, to shift us, to stretch us, right? So in order to create something new, which is what dissatisfaction, that friction, that spark is kind of moving us to, we have to let something old die and be composted. So, and this brings us to what I think is the missing piece in our attempts to sort of channel dissatisfaction into something useful for us, which is grief. So let's recap for a moment the moments that we usually feel dissatisfaction, right? When we have to give something up before we feel ready to, when we're beating ourselves up for being who and how we are or wishing we could be different, when we're disappointed in what life's giving us or how our futures look, when we expected something and we aren't getting it, or when we inherited genes or patterns from our ancestors that we don't like, right? These all are tied to Francis Weller's 5 Gates of Grief, and he lays this out in his book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, which is a really beautiful book. So the first gate of grief, everything we love, we will lose. Second gate, the places in us that have not known love. The third gate, the sorrows of the world. The fourth gate, what we expected and did not receive. And the fifth gate, ancestral grief. So you can feel how all of these, the dissatisfaction might come from knowing that we're going to lose things that we love, right? Giving up something before we feel ready to. For wishing we could be different, right? The places in us that haven't known love. Disappointed in what life's giving us or the possibilities our future seems to hold, right? The sorrows of the world. We expected something that we aren't getting, what we expected and did not receive. Or disappointment and dissatisfaction in like our family or in how we were raised or in the possibilities that seem to be put in front of us based on how we were raised, right? Based on the circumstances we were born into, right? And so that's an ancestral grief. So because dissatisfaction is sparking something in us that wants to grow, that wants to come into alignment, that wants to be stretched, that wants to be transformed, right? Because it's trying to get us to access this creativity, this life force energy, it's actually asking us to move into uncharted territory. And to move into uncharted territory, we have to be willing to move through grief. Right? It brings us right to the very edge of our known version of the world. And the bridge to what's new is grief. Which means then that a lot of the unhelpful ways that dissatisfaction manifests itself in our bodies and in our relationships are actually ways that we're trying to avoid grief. So we need grief practices. We need to befriend grief. Grief doesn't have to be terrible. Sometimes it's huge, but sometimes grief is quieter and a little more gentle, even though it's still deep, right? And whether it's huge or whether it's quiet and deep, it's always love. We just may not be used to recognizing that grief is love. So why does this matter? Because being and expressing love, growing deeper into who we are is why we're here. So dissatisfaction, creativity, grief, those are all navigation tools we have, right? Towards love, towards being more human, towards why we're here. When we have a different relationship with those, one that isn't resistant or avoidant or just doesn't pay attention to those, right? Which I guess is kind of avoidance, but avoidance is like we're aware, but kind of avoiding, or just, so maybe not aware would be a better word, right? So if we have a relationship that isn't those things, that helps make us more skillful humans. It allows us to access our instincts, our intuition. It allows us to move with the ebbs and flows, the cycles of life very differently. Which allows us to find more self-acceptance, allows us to be better advocates for our own needs, our own wants, and then also like stay open to other people and meeting other people where they're at a little bit more. So it allows us, it can completely transform our relationship with ourselves and then with life around us, including the other people in our lives. We become more whole, we become more clear, we become freer. And we also then have a different relationship with our own transformative power, right? Because at its heart, life is transformation, right? It's evolution, it's change, it's growth, it's death, right? It's all of these things. It's composting, right? It's all of that. And all of that is transformation, really. So to be human is to have transformative power. And to have transformative power, we need to then be able to be in touch with these cycles of life. We need to be able to know when that spark wants us to grow. We need to be able to allow grief to help us compost things. As we move to something new, we need to allow our creativity, our access to life force energy to kind of move through us, to be acknowledged by us, to be expressed by us, right? To be imagined by us, to be evolved with and through us. So I am deciding, I'm going to offer what I'm calling a Bitchin Better group. It's a ritual and group healing space. It's 2 hours. It's a space to feel witnessed in our dissatisfaction, to practice these skills, to start to shift our relationship with dissatisfaction and grief. In the context of an actual ritual container. So just like how when I start these podcast episodes, I light the candle. And like I mentioned today, we invoke ritual because it helps us step into the power of ritual, is that it helps us intentionally acknowledge that we're here for transformation, that we're shifting space, right? It opens us to something else coming in and supporting us and co-creating with us, right? This transformation that we're moving into. And it allows us to bring our intentions into more practiced and practical and embodied kind of way, right? So we have like what we want, but then we actually, ritual is part of the way we bring that into our body and actually put it into practice, right? Which is how we rewire neural pathways. It's how we change patterning and reorganize ourselves on a system, subtle system, which then translates to lived system kind of way. So it's going to be, I sort of joke that it's like trying, when we're feeling dissatisfied, one of the things we do a lot is we go and we bitch to our friends, right? We have a bitch session, right? And while oftentimes there can be, afterwards, we might feel a little bit of relief, like we've vented some pressure, right? Pressure's building up, and then we like verbalize it, and then we feel some relief. But we also often don't really feel better afterwards. Like nothing really changes afterwards, right? So that's a sign that what we've done is we've vented, but we haven't actually shifted. So part of the power of group ritual and group healing spaces is that it gives us the benefit of that feeling witnessed by other people, because we're wired to need that. We're wired to look for mirroring and to look for witnessing, right? From outside of us. We need that affirmation from outside of us. It's not inherently bad to look for affirmation. We also need it from inside. We can't only look for it outside, right? But we have to have this interplay between the internal and the external. And we're wired for that. So part of the power, a lot of times these big emotions, dissatisfaction, which is quote unquote ugly, right? Not really, but that's what we think. Grief, which is big or quote unquote overwhelming or ugly, right? Like, again, these are the stories we make up about these things. A lot of times we retreat inward to process those. And while that's not inherently a bad thing, sometimes we need a little bit of that interoception, that inward gaze, that inward awareness. We also are, we've gotten so used to hiding them, right? And then we don't have spaces where we have group ritual, group processing, group healing spaces. And we need to have more of those spaces, because that helps us work with how we're designed as humans and as animals, right? How we're designed to share, to connect, to be witnessed, to be supported, to be affirmed, right? Which is an incredibly important part of our rewiring, of making changes. So Bitchin Better, it's a ritual and group healing space, 2 hours. It's going to be on Tuesday, September 20th of 2022 at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So it's only $44. So it's a very yeah, for me, it just felt like a playful price. I wanted to offer it for a playful price. So we're going to come together. We're going to be witnessed in our dissatisfaction. We might be witnessed in some in grief, but we're going to sort of have an even deeper conversation around what I sort of started sharing in this podcast here. So we'd love to have you. You can sign up. I'll have the link to sign up in the show notes, or through my website at www.wildsacredjourney.com. And so, yeah, so I hope you'll consider joining us for that. If this conversation has really touched you, has shifted anything for you, or if you're, feeling like this is the right next step for you. And perhaps this is not the right offer for you or the right time. And that's great, too. So, I still hope that you heard something here in this podcast that shifted something for you, or that reframed something for you. And so if you're enjoying the podcast and you got a lot out of it, please, remember to share. That really helps support the podcast and helps it grow. You can also, I know at least on Spotify, you can rate it, which also helps sort of spread the word of the podcast. So all of that just, helps support the podcast, support me in keeping it going. And then you're also always welcome to connect and let me know what your takeaways are. I love to be in conversation and to hear from you. So you can email me at kate@wildsacredjourney.com, and that'll also be in the show notes. So, whether you, decide to join us for our group ritual and healing space, whether you just connect with us through the podcast, whether you email me, however you feel called to connect, however you feel called to experience what I shared today, and however it shifted anything for you or transformed anything for you. Let's just acknowledge that and take a few deep breaths in and out together. Just, just holding our humanness, holding the messiness of that, right? The things that we're grieving, the things that we're feeling dissatisfied by, the things that we're longing to create. Just holding all of that really tenderly. And so maybe bring a hand to your chest, to your energetic heart center, the space of our tenderness, but also some fierceness. A place that can hold disappointment and grief. And so we close out sort of this time together by just saying thank you. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you.